Vengeful gods? Endless Roman legions? And building an empire from nothing? Yeah, that sounded like a challenge. So today, I played 100% of one of the most strategic ancient Rome city builders ever. I played 100% of Nova Roma. My journey began with a band of escaped slaves, freed people, and citizens. Together, we fled from Rome to build a brand new city. But the Roman Empire wasn't about to let us go that easily, sending troops to hunt us down. This group of people, my people, were the only ones who could build something new. Forget Rome, this city is going to be called Vortia, and soon it will become the heart of the Vortian Empire. Before that though, I had to choose a spot to settle. The top of a giant mountain was calling my name, and despite not having a whole bunch of resources up here, I placed my very first outpost building. My 15 loyal citizens got to work right away constructing the outpost. It was only a matter of time before they finished. Once it was done, I gave everyone a little break, as I checked out the different buildings that I could currently construct. Religious, bridges, roads, and hovels. That's it. Since we currently had 15 citizens, it made sense to start building some hovels. That way they can actually have beds. I decided to build one main road right in front of the outpost. While some of my citizens got to work, I had the rest of them start clearing out some trees and stone nearby. I placed down my first hovel, which provided 5 beds. That meant that we were gonna need at least 2 more to keep my citizens happy. Once I got enough resources, I started constructing another hovel and even expanded the main road a little bit while building 2 more hovels. My mini city was now going to have more beds than we had people. It was time to focus on building some farms, since we only had 20 wheat for all 15 citizens. I decided to click on the first hovel I constructed. It showed the family's needs of the people living there, as well as all 4 citizens that individually lived there, which was pretty cool. With everyone working away, I decided to check out the rest of the island. And let me tell you, this thing was massive. It even had 2 whole rivers flowing all the way down into the ocean. That was when I spotted a boat full of immigrants heading directly towards Vortia. I rushed back to our city to make sure the 4th hovel was built, as I wanted to potentially recruit some more citizens. Thankfully, it was, and to make our city look even nicer, I decided to start constructing a small temple. I noticed that my people needed a source of water. Currently, none of the houses had any, and I didn't really have a good way of getting any. The temple finished constructing, and I noticed that I could consult the gods through it. Real quick, hit that subscribe button. We're so close to 100k. Apparently, since the temple was built on a cliff, they had no clue how to actually appear. But basically, they said that I should consult them and dedicate temples in their name, just like the Romans did. I honestly had no clue who I wanted to dedicate this first one to. It looked like my options were the god of war, the goddess of agriculture and fertility, the god of thunder, king of gods, the god of fire and the forge, and the god of the sea. I decided to go with Jupiter, the god of thunder. When I dedicated it to him, I got 2 favors, which can be used in exchange for new technologies. I could currently unlock small apartments, small granaries, or foresters. I ended up unlocking the forester building. Since we didn't have a lot of trees on the top of the mountain with us, I decided that this was the most useful. In addition to the forester, it also looked like I had unlocked wells, forum tiles, small stockpiles, and small warehouses. Some more immigrants came to visit. 3 of them decided to stay, and 1 of them decided to head back. This was awesome because we were now at 20 citizens, which actually was one of Jupiter's divine tasks for us. So I unlocked 3 more favors. This time, I spent them on the tax office building. We weren't currently collecting any gold from the citizens. Now I would be able to. That meant long term, I would actually be able to build a city forum, as they cost quite a bit of gold. That's coming soon though. First, let's get down some wells. Once the first one constructed, a bunch of people became happy, which I totally understand why. Since we were low on wood and didn't have a steady source of it, I decided it was time to construct a forester. Before doing so though, I branched out from our main road. By the time the addition finished constructing and I finally placed down my forester, it was already winter time. That meant all of the food that my city had gathered during the fall needed to last us until next fall. With that in mind, I decided to build 2 more farms. We did it! The small town of Vortia had survived an entire year. I decided to open up the different job priority list. Now that I kinda had my bearings on ruling after a year, I decided it was time to make things as efficient as possible. It turned out that I needed 15 stone to construct a tax office. So I sent my citizens to go and clear out a little area with small stones and trees. It took until nighttime, but I finally had enough stone to build a tax office. While it was being built, I expanded our main road, and then put down a hovel with a nice view, as well as another well. This cliffside was the perfect spot to build another temple. It was absolutely beautiful. So I placed one, as close to the cliff as I possibly could. Interestingly enough, it looked like the ground automatically leveled to make the land underneath it flat. I then realized that the tax office had finished constructing. By default, my tax office had a tax rate of 20%, which wasn't terrible. The only issue though that I ran into was that I actually had to have tax collectors going out and getting the money. With the city now being situated on food, water, and resources, I decided to build a couple more hovels. After what felt like forever, the second temple finished building. I of course consulted the gods. This time I could at least see their faces, but I think the mountain threw them off once again. I ended up dedicating this temple to the goddess of agriculture and fertility. Her name was Ceres. I chose her for this temple because it was pretty close to my wheat fields. She granted me 2 favors for dedicating the temple to her, and then another 3 favors for completing one of her divine tasks of having 5 or more farms. I used 3 favors to unlock the stone quarry building, and then the small apartment building. It also looked like I had unintentionally completed one of Jupiter's tasks, having 2 temples. So I got some additional favors. The small apartment building looked a lot nicer than the hovels, so I ended up placing one of the small apartment buildings directly on top of one of the hovels I already constructed. I then expanded the main city road inland towards some stone deposits. After that, I visited Jupiter's temple and ended up using the favor of the gods to increase +3 happiness within 5 tiles of the temple. This costed me 1 favor to use. With the road completed, I placed down a stone quarry. That meant that I was no longer going to have to find little pieces of stone and tell my citizens to go and collect it. My citizens wheeled over the supplies needed to build the stone quarry. Out of absolutely nowhere, Jupiter's temple caught on fire. Luckily enough, some citizens were hanging out nearby, so they were able to run to the well and put it out pretty quickly. I managed to scrape up 22 golden coins from my citizens. That was enough to build a mini forum, so that's exactly what I did. My builders even started terraforming the land a little bit by bringing dirt over and flattening it out. It didn't take long for them to finish. The forum was now completed. The small insula building was looking pretty aesthetic. It was so aesthetic looking that I ended up placing down another one, destroying a hovel. There appeared to be 2 pretty large doors on each apartment building. I didn't know it yet, but there was actually a little bit more complexity to the apartment buildings than just placing them down. My citizens didn't really seem too happy right now. That was because I was only providing them with grain as their food. Now let me tell you, I don't think anybody would be happy with a grain-only diet, so only 48 happiness is understandable. I really was trying to get them some other kind of food, but we hadn't learned how from the gods yet. That was until I realized that we had 45 population, which was one of Jupiter's divine tasks that I got 4 favors from. It turned out that the next divine task was to donate 14 gold coins, and the one after that, make a forum of at least 5 tiles, which I already did. We were rolling in favors now. I had 15 to be exact. I used 3 to unlock a palisade wall, 5 on a wooden guard tower, 2 on a small granary, and 3 on some grapevines. I immediately started building some grapevines as soon as I possibly could. Having good steepness increased the yield for the grapevines, which I thought was pretty interesting. I guess I'm not really an expert on growing them. Right across from the grapevines that my people were planting, I constructed a forester. I then tested out placing down some palisades. This didn't really work out though, since I didn't have a lot of wood. To fix that, I placed down yet another forester. I finally decided to look into what I needed to do to make the people living in the apartment buildings happy. And it was a lot, not gonna lie. The building needed to be exposed to pottery, grapes, wine, grain, and even fish. Oh yeah, and they also require wood to burn during the winters. That planning began with placing down a small granary. If I was going to be producing different food types now, I needed a place to store them all. I then placed my first guard tower and some more walls. I ended up unintentionally completing one of Ciri's divine tasks, which was to build a granary. I also completed another one which landed me at 11 favors. I spent 1 on food counters, 7 on medium apartments, and 3 on fishing huts. The food counter was pretty cool. You can place them in the empty spaces in apartment buildings. Whichever citizens take the job of a food counter goes and grabs grain, grapes, and any other kind of foods and keeps them nearby so they could distribute them to the other citizens living in the apartments. I finally had enough resources to place down another guard tower, and then a wooden gate. My plan is to wall off all sides leading up to the top of this mountain, as this was the core of the Vortian civilization. Since defending the city is incredibly important, I made the job of the archers as the #1 priority on the job list, and then, of course, disabled it, since nobody was currently attacking our city. After, I started constructing the city's very first medium insula. Despite it saying medium, this thing was massive. While it was constructing, I started walling off what I thought was the only other way up to our city. The situation that I feared for happened. All 3 apartment buildings in the city said they wanted pottery. I had no clue what buildings I needed to make pottery, and I also definitely didn't have any of the technologies unlocked. At least I was able to finish the second wall though. In addition to pottery, my medium apartment building also requested water from an aqueduct. I was a little bit annoyed because I now had to figure out how to get pottery as soon as possible and also set up aqueducts, if I even had them unlocked. To mediate the happiness situation in my medium apartment building, I thought maybe placing down a food counter inside of it would help. It was now time to select the very first governor of Vortia. I honestly had no clue who to pick. They all had their pros and cons. I ended up going with Proculius Manilius Lanus. He was really good at preventing fires from spreading, by 20% to be exact. But anything we were trying to sell to a merchant, it was going to be marked up by 20%. I guess it's a good thing we aren't trading with any merchants currently. Vortia was becoming a thriving success. Even during massive storms, immigrant ships would stop by to drop off citizens. It seemed like everyone wanted to be here. One of Jupiter's divine tasks was to have 80 citizens, and we just hit that. So I received 5 favors. Trust me, I put those favors to good use by unlocking the charcoal maker and clay pits. I was now only 2 favors off from unlocking pottery workshops. I started placing down my very first charcoal maker. If you place it too close to any of the residential buildings, it causes unhappiness because the production site is too loud. Out of nowhere, a random god that I had never interacted with said that they were angry I didn't have any temples dedicated to them. Before I could even figure out which god that was, Jupiter appeared to me. When I interacted with him to see what was going on, he said that intruders were coming to attack our city. It was the old Roman Empire. Jupiter also mentioned that I could raise a militia at my outpost building. I was a bit flustered to say the least. The first course of action I took was to enable the archer jobs once again. That was when another random god I've never talked to before appeared, kinda mad. I didn't have time for him right now, so I just kinda clicked away his conversations and then raised a militia at my outpost. It didn't take long for the militia to raise, and it produced 2 units. I saw an enemy boat approaching our island. There only appeared to be 1 enemy unit on the boat, which didn't seem too bad. When it finally arrived at my island, it scared away an immigrant ship, and then the raiders started heading towards my city. My 2 guard towers started raining down arrows at the enemy legion. Before they could even make it to my wooden palisades, my guard towers took them out. It was in that moment I was really happy that we had built on the top of the mountain. Being so high up didn't stop fire hazards though. Since things finally settled down and we didn't have invaders on our doorstep, I decided to place down a clay pit. That was step 1 in being able to get pottery. With that underway, I decided to make the gods a bit happier by placing down a temple that I could dedicate to them. Once it finished constructing, I decided to dedicate it to Vulcan, the god of fire and the forge. This was one of the ones that appeared and was kinda mad that I didn't have any temples in his name. At this point, we were producing wood, stone, charcoal, gold, and even clay. All of these materials needed a place to be stored, so I built a small warehouse, which actually fulfilled one of Vulcan's divine tasks. I had a total of 5 favors to spend, so I spent 3 of them on a masonry. This building employs masons which go around the city and repair buildings when they get damaged. It looked like each mason could only service a certain area, so I decided to place it in the middle of our city. The service area basically included every single building we had. It was now time to select a new governor. The previous one had served his term of 3 years. I decided to reappoint Proculius. I ended up getting a warning though that the people were going to become unhappy since he was appointed for way too long, and any of his positive traits were gonna decrease, as well as his negative traits get worse. The city was approaching 98 citizens. We were so close to 100. So I placed another small apartment building and we now had 110 beds. It was just a waiting game now. With fall wrapping up, the citizens harvested all of the food for the next year. I made a rather bad decision and decided to make an offering to Ceres with almost all of our wheat. This and another divine task though did give me a lot of favors, so I finally unlocked the pottery workshop, which I've been needing for a long time. I then used 5 more favors to unlock aqueducts, which I also had been needing for a while. The second I closed the technology screen, I placed down a pottery workshop. All of the apartment buildings were no longer going to be able to complain or be unhappy due to pottery. It was about time that I dipped my feet into aqueducts and how water worked. The very basics of it are you need to have a water tower and an aqueduct leading directly to it in order to give it water. The aqueducts themselves have to have a downward elevation, otherwise the flowing water won't flow. It took me a couple of attempts, but I finally was able to get an aqueduct set up leading directly to a water tower. Once it gets fully constructed, the medium apartment building can no longer complain about water. It seemed like happiness in the city was lower than usual. That's when I realized my citizens were unhappy that I hadn't selected a new governor. Proculius' stats were completely fried. I ended up choosing a new governor named Caeso Vasilius Fronto. He reduced food consumption by 20%, but also stopped the rate of immigrant ships from coming by 20%. The aqueduct finished constructing. We now had running water. To the water tower at least. The city once again was at max capacity. We had 110 citizens out of 110 beds. So I started constructing another medium apartment building. The people wanted a form of entertainment since there were so many of them now. So I unlocked a small theater and then started building it right next to the 2 medium apartment buildings. Despite unlocking the fishing hut building type a while ago, I never built one. Since we were located at the top of the mountain, I didn't really have a lot of fishing spots. So I finally built a fishing hut on the coast, and then some roads directly to it. That was when I realized something was going on at Ceres' temple. I was able to make an offering of grapes to get some favors. Jupiter was then happy I had 120 population, and I made an offering of gold to him, getting even more favors. I spent those favors to unlock wineries, stone roads, and docks. Conveniently enough, the medium apartment buildings needed wine, so I placed down my very first winery. Things started to stabilize a little bit. The city was at 43 happiness a minute ago, and now we're at 72. It was time to select a new mayor. The one I selected gave a bonus of minus 20% building degradation. It seemed like we were running out of space on the top of the mountain to build new buildings. I decided it was time to start expanding downward onto the rest of the island. To make it a little bit more efficient to get down there though, I built some stone roads, replacing the current dirt ones that we had. My workers finished building the first temple that wasn't on top of the mountain. I could now actually see all of the different gods that I could dedicate the temple to. I ended up dedicating this one to the god of war, Mars. He granted me 2 favors for doing so. I spent those 2 favors right away unlocking the wine shop. This building was very similar to the wine counter. With my abundant resources, I decided to expand the forum by 3 tiles. While doing so, the old Romans staged an attack, and I didn't even notice that they made it onto my island until the very last second. I was not prepared for this attack at all. I didn't even hire a militia, and my guard towers weren't fully manned. I had the archer jobs switched off until the very last second. Let's just say things were not going very well. One of my guard towers was completely destroyed already, and the enemies were able to set one of my wheat fields on fire. Weirdly enough, after doing so, they started running away. That was when I noticed 2 more units heading up a mountainside I didn't even know they could head up. My militia ran right over to the choke and started fighting off the enemy invaders. On the other side, the guard tower I had just repaired had just taken out another enemy unit. The enemy legions were pretty tactical. They even tried to surround me at my own choke point. Luckily enough, we were able to overpower them and secure the city. But I now know the city had a weakness. I need to wall off this whole side of the mountain over here. Apparently, my citizens liked our performance in the last invasion. They became a lot more happy, and I even got an achievement for it. Since I had no clue when the next invasion was going to happen, I decided to wall off this whole side of the mountain as quickly as possible. And of course, put a guard tower right behind the new wall as well. For the first time in the history of Vortia, we experienced a drought. The 2 rivers that we had at the top of the mountain started to dry up, and it looked like even all of the grass started to die. There really wasn't much that I could do about the drought. So I started focusing on other things, and I completed 6 of Mars's divine tasks, which was pretty crazy. By the end of all of it, I had 32 favors ready to be redeemed. I went on a complete spending spree, starting with large temples, statues, stone walls, marble quarries, and terrain engineering. The first new technology that I used out of all of them was upgrading my wooden walls into stone. The next unlock that I explored was the statues. I ended up placing a small obelisk directly in the center of my forum. I then built a marble quarry right next to the only 3 marble deposits we had on the entire island. Let's just say connecting a road all the way over there was kind of annoying. I selected a new governor named Gaius. He provided plus 20% tax revenue and minus 20% building degradation. With my population once again almost being at max, I placed down another small insula. In an effort to get a little bit more building space on the top of the mountain, I built a stone bridge over one of the rivers, leading to another little section that had more space. Of course, I then completely walled off any way that led up to it. Randomly, I noticed that I had completed one of Vulcan's divine tasks. It was to build 2 charcoal makers, which I already was doing, so I basically got some favors for free. Those favors didn't last long at all though. I spent them on the apple tree farm building type, which I started building a whole bunch of in the new area that I had just connected to my city. Apparently, the gods didn't like apple trees because a bunch of my buildings had caught on fire, including my outpost. In the center of all of the fires, Jupiter appeared, and he said that I was neglecting his temples. I had no clue why he was so upset, and when I checked the job priority list, it looked like there were enough temple workers, so I have no clue what he was on about. When I was upgrading some more dirt roads, a whole bunch of enemies swarmed my island. I once again was caught off guard. I didn't have any of my guards in the towers, and I didn't have a militia raised. If the city survives this one, I'm gonna have to start paying a lot more attention for invaders. In a desperate attempt, I tried recruiting a militia very last second. Thankfully, they were able to assemble pretty quickly. I now just need to hope that the enemy units don't all bunch together. Thankfully enough, they didn't. They all scattered out and started attacking different things. Luckily, I was able to take out 2 of the enemy legions, and there wasn't too much damage to the city. With this being the 3rd attack, I started to realize that I shouldn't have my guard towers as a part of the walls. So I did the unthinkable. I built another wall directly in front of the wall that I currently had. This basically formed an airlock. I ended up having to rebuild the temple that I dedicated to Mars because it got destroyed in the last invasion. The city was once again at max population after I disbanded the militia. I placed down 2 more small apartments to fix this. I then continued branching out to the other section of the mountain that I had connected to with a bridge. Since we didn't really have any direct access to this side of the island, I ended up putting a gate and planned on expanding down there later. Maybe I could use it for another residential area, kind of like the top of the mountain. I decided that it was time to expand the industrial part of the island now, or at least cut out some more space for it. So I put up some more walls, and then realized that I could make an offering to Jupiter. I used the favors from the offering to unlock an iron mine, and then a toolsmith. I wanted to get some iron right away. So I immediately found some iron nodes and then placed down an iron mine right next to them. Also needed a road to get over there. I hadn't really utilized the right side of the mountain very much, where I just put the iron mine. So I threw down some wells and then started constructing a temple. It didn't take long for the temple to build. I then dedicated it to Ceres. This made sense because I wanted to plant some more crops in the area. Funny enough, building an iron mine was one of the tasks for Mars, so I got some free favors from it and unlocked the bakery. And then of course, built one. After that, I placed down a medium insula, collected some more favors, and unlocked the large granary. Of course, it was time to select a new mayor too. This one was really good though. He generated plus 20% tax revenue and added 10 happiness to the city total. The medium apartment building that I recently constructed required an aqueduct, so I started building one. And that was when Vortia got hit with a drought. The second great Vortian drought was taking its toll. The once flourishing aqueducts and water storages were now empty. Let's just say the citizens living in the medium insulas were becoming unhappy, and the happiness of the city as a whole was dropping. Things got so desperate that I even tried building more aqueducts. Right when you think that things couldn't get any worse, I saw a fire in the distance. Roman centurions had snuck into my separated part of the city and lit some buildings on fire. The worst part is, we barely even had any water to put these fires out. The only thing that I could do, and did, was raise a militia as quickly as possible, because my guard towers didn't cover the area that these pesky invaders snuck in from. Once my militia was assembled, they quickly ran over to stop the Romans from causing any more damage. As soon as my troops started attacking one of the enemy units, the Romans started to retreat to their ships. They pretty much just left one of their own units for dead. I wasn't complaining though, because they did a really good job at catching us off guard, and that raid could have been a lot worse. Now that the attack was over, I was trying to figure out how the Romans were able to sneak in. I tried walling off the gap that they came through, but it wouldn't let me. So I tried going even further down, and I was only able to wall off a little section of it. That was when the drought ended, and the river started flowing again. It made me realize that the Romans were only able to sneak in from there because the river was super low. In the moment, I thought that this was only going to be an issue when we had a drought going on. Funny enough, the weather completely changed, and it started snowing now as winter came around. With the drought being over, my citizens found a new thing to complain about. They wanted bathhouses, which I didn't have unlocked. I made it my goal to unlock 3 more favors so I would be able to build one. With my plan now in place, I decided to go put some defenses up where the Romans snuck in. That was weirdly timed. I never actually placed down a toolsmith when I first unlocked the building type, so I found some space next to the clay pit and placed one down. I then checked on the Empire's only marble mine and the hovel right next to it. The citizens living there complained that they needed water, so I built them a well. I was then reminded again that I needed to start producing some wine. Apparently, the winery that I had built couldn't make any wine because we didn't have enough grapes. One thing that was kind of bothering me was that I didn't have a road leading to the disconnected part of the city. To fix this, I used the terrain editing tool, which allowed me to raise and lower ground as well as flatten it. Once I created a pretty flat path, I destroyed some farms that were in the way, and then I tried connecting the 2 parts of the city with a road. This actually ended up working out a lot better than I thought it was going to. Since I now knew how to use the terrain editor, I tried utilizing it to get a little bit more space on top of the mountain. Sure, I really was only gaining an extra 6 tiles, but I thought it was worth it because that could at least be another 2 buildings or so. Talking about utilizing space, I placed down some farms in some unusual spots. It was then time to select a new mayor. This time, I went with Nonus Furius Cincinatus. He provided a 20% immigrant ship frequency bonus and a 20% tax revenue bonus. I'm gonna say it, this guy was definitely the best mayor we've ever had. I noticed that the city was running low on charcoal, even though we already had a charcoal maker. So I ended up destroying a well and building another one. I was immediately reminded though that I needed to replace the well, as a building nearby caught on fire instantly. Well, wasn't that a little ironic? The small little fire ended up spreading to a couple other buildings, and became quite big. Luckily enough, my citizens were able to put it out before it did any real damage though. Just a few minor repairs. A whole bunch of Roman ships were heading directly towards the island. It seemed like old Rome was no longer messing around and sending actual armies. This time though, I was prepared in advance. I raised a militia before they even set foot on my island, and sent the militia in to the side that all of the enemies were attacking from. I was incredibly happy that I decided to reinforce the side that the Romans snuck in from last time. Apparently, even though the river was back at full strength, they were still able to swim across it. The archer tower that I built over there was working overtime. It took out one whole Roman centurion unit by itself. I then sent my militiamen over to basically block the river from any other troops coming through it. My blockade worked out pretty well. Not a single enemy unit made it past my line of militia. The invasion was basically won at this point. There were only 2 enemy units left, and there was no way they were breaking through. It wasn't long before my troops finished them off, and we had now successfully survived the invasion. Real quick, hit that subscribe button. We're so close to 100k. I wanted to make the area that I bridged over to into a food production area. I already had apple trees over here, and I was gonna build more. I placed down a granary as we were gonna need a spot to hold all of this food. But for some reason, the land completely changed when I placed it down, and the river that was flowing nearby was now flowing directly through where I was building. This was incredibly frustrating. In an attempt to try and save the land, I used the terrain editing tool to bring it back to how it was, or at least attempted to. Once I restored it to as best as I possibly could, I had my citizens get to work. I then started looking for a good location to place down a dock. I decided to do it on the side of the island that I hadn't built anything on yet. Lightning struck right where I was planning on placing it, so that had to be a good sign. I finally placed it down, and then built a long road leading directly over to it. When I went back over to see how the terrain modification went, there was still some water going over a good chunk of the land, so I had to edit it again. Honestly, things didn't end up working out how I wanted it to, so I decided I was just going to place down a small granary instead of the large. I then once again messed with the terrain one last time. For the first time ever, a merchant ship arrived at my dock. I was pretty excited because we hadn't done any trading up until this point. That excitement didn't last for long though. I really didn't have a need to buy any of the items that they were trading. So I dismissed the ship and it sailed off. Some bad storms started to plague our city. Both of the rivers in it were overflooded, and even new rivers appeared. I was really hoping that this flooding wouldn't destroy any buildings. Somehow, another merchant ship had arrived despite the stormy weather. The most sad moment in Vortian history happened. I had to select a new governor. Since the current one had no negatives, it was hard to choose somebody else. I ended up going with someone named Naunus Cornelius Brutus. He pretty much made buildings last longer, but made fires spread more. After appointing him, I sold 100 wood at a merchant ship. Before I sold the wood, I had over 900, so it made sense to sell. With the money I made from the wood, I bought some charcoal. That might have seemed like a pointless trade, but I needed the charcoal immediately so I could finally make an offering to Vulcan. After my offering, I completed 2 more divine tasks, and I now had 15 favors. I immediately spent them on swineherds and olive trees. I made sure that I saved 2 additional favors to finally unlock bath reservoirs. A new building category appeared in my menu called Bath Complex. The bath reservoir building type appeared in there. I still needed to actually unlock some pools though. Once I was finished checking out the bathhouse stuff, I decided to see where I could place down some olive trees. Luckily enough, I was able to place them in the new food production area that I had set aside. I also then placed down a whole bunch of swineherds across from all of the olive trees. The citizens were going to be eating good going forward. Of course, it was time for another Roman invasion. This time though, there were a lot less enemy units attacking for some reason. We must have made a large dent in their army from the last invasion. I tried a slightly different strategy this time. I sent my militiamen out to confront the enemies, and then I sent them over to the choke point that they were gonna have to hold again. Sending my militiamen out was maybe a mistake. I wasn't sure if they were gonna make it to the choke point in time. Luckily enough though, they did. We now just needed to hold that point. Long, continuous fighting went on until the nighttime. It was finally almost over, and when it did end, I immediately disbanded my militia, and they turned back into regular citizens. But there was an issue. We now had more citizens than we had beds in the Empire. I decided that it was now time to expand because we needed more houses and maybe a bit more food since we were running low. The first thing that I did was start replacing some dirt roads in the front of the city to stone. I then started mapping out where I was going to maybe place some new houses and farms. When I was finally ready, I placed down a whole bunch of wheat farms. After that, I placed a medium insula directly across from the farms. Since we were now going to have buildings outside of the city walls, I decided to build more walls. It took some time, but the wheat farms and the medium apartment building finished constructing. I also checked in on the swine herd buildings. The animals had a pretty nice view, not gonna lie. After what felt like forever, I finally placed down a bath reservoir. This didn't make my citizens any happier since we didn't have a bath house yet, but it was one step closer. I came across an apartment building that was still complaining that they wanted more wine, despite us having 25 glasses. I honestly didn't know why they were complaining they didn't have enough when the city had plenty, but I had a suspicion the wine wasn't getting over there quick enough maybe. Another merchant ship arrived at our dock. I sold 50 wood and then 25 pottery. I was planning on having a bunch of farms in the new area of the city. Just so my workers didn't have to run back and forth all the time, I built a large granary nearby. It also appeared that my medium insula needed some water from aqueducts, so I placed down a water storage. And then I had to find a way to build an aqueduct going all the way down to that water storage. This normally would be an easy task, but the water storage was at the bottom of a cliff, and the river was at the top of it. My first attempt at this was just going straight down the hill where my roads were, leading directly to the water storage. Sadly enough, this was way too steep. My second attempt was making an S back and forth with the aqueducts. This also didn't really end up working out, sadly. After what felt like another 5 or 6 attempts, I ended up giving up, only for now. I figured that focusing on something else and coming back to it later might magically give me the ability to actually figure it out. In the meantime though, I placed down another apartment building, and then a guard tower to protect the two. I even placed down a guard tower to protect the farms. A nasty storm broke out again, and the river started flooding. You would think that the medium apartment buildings would take advantage of this and get water from the flooding. My citizens were a little bit fed up with the previous mayor, so I elected someone new named Sextus Octavius Kalidas. This was another overpowered mayor. He decreased the cost of buildings by 20% and also buying things from merchants by 20%. The second apartment building in the new area finished up. The citizens living there immediately demanded they needed pottery. This was another weird situation, since the city had over 150 pottery. It was definitely because there wasn't any nearby. To kind of take care of this though, I ended up placing a clay pit right on the beach. I then got a really good idea of how I could potentially get the aqueducts to work out, from the top of the mountain all the way down to the bottom of the cliff. I placed the source in a slightly lower location, and then started curving the actual aqueducts through the side of the cliffs in the rocks. This ended up working out. Of course, right as I got this working though, I immediately got attacked by some Romans without even knowing. I had to get my archers into the guard towers as quick as possible, and I started raising a militia. It didn't take long for them to assemble, but it also didn't take long for the enemies to sneak into the corner of our city. The militia did their job, and the other corners of the city held fast as well. Now that the invasion was over, I could finally continue putting up the aqueduct. It wasn't working now, which was very frustrating, because I literally had it before the invasion. I was definitely doing something wrong, so I restarted from the beginning. This time, I made the curve a little bit more exaggerated, and it worked. I really felt bad for the workers though, because they were gonna have to be scaling the side of the cliff just to build this thing. 3 things happened next, all at the same time. The first was that Ceres became very angered at us. The second was that we finished a divine task of hitting a population of 320, and the third was that a drought came over the city. Despite having enough favors to unlock a pool, I ended up using them on the fire brigade building type. With the drought currently going on, I was afraid that fires were going to break out, so this seemed like a more important investment than the pools right now. I placed one down in the middle of the city. This covered about half of it. I was for sure going to need another one to cover the other parts. It looked like some buildings had gotten destroyed back when we had some flooding, so I repaired them. I started to regret not spending some of those favors on a bathing pool. I was currently losing an additional 17 happiness because we didn't have enough beds for the citizens in our city. On top of all of that, it looked like I was running out of gold completely. I had no clue why, and I didn't know what was going on exactly. That was until I realized I left all 20 archers employed. So I was paying them a salary despite not being under attack currently. I of course unchecked the archer jobs, hoping that this was going to fix our economy a little bit. I then placed down a brand new tax office near the new houses we built in the new area. The merchant pulled up too, so we had a chance to recover our economy. The first thing I did with the merchant was sell wood, then pottery, and then even some marble. This brought us all the way back up to 160 coins, which I then used 65 of to make an offering to Jupiter. With the favors that I just unlocked, you would think that I would use them on a pool. Well, I didn't. I used them on a weaponsmith. Now this might seem like a terrible idea, but one of my divine tasks was to actually build a weaponsmith, so I would be getting more favors from doing this. Once it finished building, I immediately collected my 5 additional favors from Mars. It was then time to appoint a new mayor. I elected someone named Olas Cicero Kalidas. He was just another mid-tier mayor. Apparently Ceres didn't like him though, cause she appeared to us and said she wasn't going to take this disrespect. A famine then broke out on some of the city's crops. I realized that I built the bath reservoir, but I never actually connected an aqueduct to it. So I finally did that. I then started focusing on increasing our iron output. There were 2 additional rocks that I wasn't harvesting iron from. I built an iron mine right next to them, and then a road leading directly to it. Despite building a whole bunch of wheat farms, I still didn't have enough wheat. The only logical thing to do was build more, which I of course did. I then sold some wood and pottery at the merchant ship, walled off a little bit more of the new area, and then got attacked by the old Romans. This attack felt more intense as there were 6 boats heading towards the island. Despite seeing them in advance, I still forgot to enable my archer jobs. Thankfully, I at least got the militia ready. The Romans weren't playing around this time. They already breached one of my walls and still had full troops. Honestly, I wasn't sure how I was going to survive this, since I only had 1 militia and I had to block off 2 different areas. My militia and archer towers did a pretty good job at taking out the enemies in the front. I rushed the rest of my troops over to the back, which honestly looked like it was under control. Funny enough, one of the Roman units started to retreat since it didn't have a lot of health left. Of course, right after the invasion, Ceres decided to attack my farms once again. The invasion wasn't enough, I guess. I wasn't really sure how to make Ceres more happy, so I decided to build her a large temple. You would think that would do it, right? I went through every single apartment building in the city and added a food counter and wine shop to each one. When the large temple finished, I completed a divine task for Jupiter, and then I made an offering to him. This landed me at 17 favors, which I spent on a large insula. I knew exactly where I wanted to build my very first large apartment building. It was going to cause a little bit of trouble though, because I had to destroy a medium insula just to place this one down. I really wanted to make sure that I was getting the most beds out of the small space that I had on top of this mountain. I opened up the large temple for the very first time, and then I dedicated it to Ceres. This temple showed a little meter that showed my current standing with the goddess currently. It also allowed me to host festivals in her name. The large apartment building felt like it was taking years to build. It finally finished, and of course, the citizens were complaining about pottery already. This reminded me that I never built a pottery workshop in the new area of the city, so I went back and did that. I then finally unlocked the cool pool. My citizens had been asking for this for the longest time. I just never really got a chance to unlock it. There were a lot more pressing matters, at least until now. I built my very first 3x2 pool connected to the bath reserve. My citizens were about to no longer be able to complain about this. The gods had other plans though. One of them appeared saying that I wasn't being respectful enough to them, and that I needed to face their wrath. A whole bunch of explosions started to go off right next to my cool pool. This was honestly just frustrating, but it looked like my workers worked through the explosions. It was merchant time. I sold off some goods, netting me 150 coins. I then built a pretty large grape farm area, right next to the wheat farm area. I of course built a winery right next to all the grape farms. Since I had a designated farming area for grapes and wheat now, I decided to build one for olive trees. And since the city was expanding, I threw down a large insula to expand our population, and also a medium one because I could squeeze it in there. I felt pretty satisfied as the city's happiness was at 77. The cool pools were doing their job. I felt like the industrial area of my city had to be connected to my new farming area. This inspired me to build a long road all the way over from the farming area to the marble mine right outside of the industrial area. Apparently one of the gods was still mad. That didn't really matter to me in the moment though, because the Romans had launched an attack on my island, and I didn't even notice them coming. This was a terrible time for an attack too, since my farming area hadn't been walled off completely yet. The enemies sure took advantage of that. They started setting a bunch of my farms on fire. After doing that though, a few of them returned to their boats, which was kinda weird. But hey, I'm not complaining. The ones that didn't retreat though, headed directly over to the side of the city they could sneak into. I, as usual, got my militia over there as quickly as possible. It seemed like they were doing a good job utilizing the choke point as usual. You would think that the Romans would be able to do a lot more damage, considering we were heavily outnumbered. I might have spoken too soon. The Romans forced their way in, and actually ended up taking out my entire militia. It was now up to the guard towers to do the rest. This seemed like a very doable situation. There was only one enemy unit left, and the guard towers were dealing a lot of damage to it. It for sure was a lot closer than I would have liked though. Thankfully, the Romans didn't make it to the center of my city. The guard towers were able to finish the job. That invasion was for sure a learning experience. I now knew that I had to completely wall off the farming area of my city. Despite it costing a whole bunch of stone, it was completely worth it. I didn't want the Romans to ever have free reign on a big chunk of Vortia ever again. A new storm hit the island, and a huge flood started breaking out. I decided to use this time to go through the city and renovate by replacing some of the medium insulas with large ones. The flooding started to get really bad. It even started flooding some of our new farmland. Sadly enough, it was time to appoint a new mayor. I appointed a mid one compared to the guy who we currently had. The only benefit he provided was plus 20% immigrant ship arrivals. The city was flourishing with food now. It seemed like we once again hit the max population. I built a brand new road directly under the cliff at the mountainside, and then planned out where I was going to build some more apartments. I didn't actually build any yet, but what I did build was another large temple. Vulcan was the god that kept appearing and saying that he was unhappy. I was heavily considering dedicating this temple to him, but I realized I didn't dedicate one to Neptune yet. There were definitely favors that I was missing out on from Neptune, so I decided to make this his first temple. This felt like a 200 IQ play. I literally got 21 favors all from Neptune because of this. I decided to spend 15 of those favors on an infantry barracks and cavalry barracks. I still had another 6 favors remaining, but I went ahead and placed down one of each barracks type across from the pool. That was when I decided to host my very first festival for Neptune. Neptune's festival granted me 5 favors. What I was gonna spend them on? I had no clue. After some tough thinking, I ended up choosing the olive press, since I recently built a whole bunch of olive tree farms. The infantry barracks and cavalry barracks that my workers had been building for a while now finished. One problem though, I didn't have enough people to staff the buildings. That was a worry about it later problem. The merchant arrived. I of course sold off as much wood as I possibly could, since I had over 1.5k now. With the city having all these additional resources, I needed to put up some more guard towers to protect it. I was trying to expand my running water to a new water tank. That was when I realized I was being attacked. I heard a whole bunch of Romans land on one side of my island. There also was one straggler, which didn't make any sense. But that was beside the point. There were enemies on my island, and I didn't have any of my archers in their towers. Per usual, my militia came to save the day. The stragglers on the other side of the island were still straggling. One Roman unit was already inside the city walls, and there was another heading in, while the other 2 kind of did a hit and run. It was a long and nasty fight, and a lot of my buildings were set on fire. I had full trust in my militia and guard towers to finish the job though. After some time, they did, but it made me realize I really needed to train some more troops other than just a militia. It was time to lock in and get this new aqueduct up and running. My first couple of attempts didn't work though, since I had the apartments in the way, so I ended up running the aqueduct along the roads. My citizens can just go around it. I noticed that something was going on at my small temple to Mars. I could make an offering, so I did. I then saw he had another divine task of building a barracks. This ended up completing all of the divine tasks for Mars. I was pretty happy about this because I felt like I didn't really do that many divine tasks for him. It felt like a freebie. With my aqueduct branching off of another aqueduct, I honestly had no idea how much water was going to go to this one. I was assuming half, but I didn't know how it was going to work. I spent 5 of those favors on fine wine. This increased my citizens' happiness from wine by 3. After that, I spent 3 more favors on the large charcoal maker and called it a day. Now that I had the large charcoal building type, I destroyed 2 of my regular charcoal makers and replaced it with 1 large charcoal maker. The aqueduct branched off of another aqueduct, finished. Water started flowing to it pretty quickly. I was still super curious to see how much water is actually going to go to it. I checked the first water tower and it looked like it had 125 water flowing in. The second one did as well, so it split equally. Randomly, it looked like I could complete a favor. I ended up doing 2 of Neptune's, which was offering wine and building a dock. Vulcan still seemed to be mad at me. After selecting a new mayor that increased our tax revenue by 20%, I decided it was time to place down my first olive press. I accidentally placed it right next to the grapevines instead of the olive trees, so I destroyed it and moved it over there. I then placed down 2 large insulas as I needed to increase the amount of people I could have in the city, just because we needed infantrymen and cavalrymen. Vulcan had a fit and started setting a whole bunch of my buildings on fire. I still honestly had no clue why he was so upset with me. And the crazy part is, he wouldn't tell me why he was mad. At least the fires were keeping the villagers warm during wintertime. The second that my 2 large insulas finished constructing, I placed down another 2. I was planning on growing our population non-stop, since we had a consistent food source now. I got a very random achievement, that I lost food at wintertime due to having bad storage. This was a rather unexciting achievement, but it informed me that my food was getting wasted. Despite being unrelated to the achievement, I ended up using my favors to unlock a stockpile and warehouse. Literally, right as I was doing that, I got another achievement. It was for having 500 citizens. The large insulas really were working. In order to celebrate, I was planning on hosting a festival for Neptune. The plans changed though. I ended up using a whole bunch of wine to fulfill one of his divine tasks. I unlocked the Undertaker, which sounded pretty cool. The workers of this building bring over bodies to wherever they need to be buried. On a more positive note, I replaced a medium insula that I already built with a large one. The rivers in Vortia then started to flood, and the Romans were attacking again. Isn't that just a perfect combination? Before any actual enemies arrived on the island, I tried mapping out a potential aqueduct location. It seemed like it was going to work out pretty well. The storms arrived, and so did the Romans. There were quite a bit of them this time, 15 to be exact. I did my usual and trained a militia, but they all drowned in a river. I didn't even know that was possible. It didn't seem like the enemies were drowning, which was kind of frustrating. I now had no melee troops, but something good did happen. Some of the enemies on the other side of the city weren't able to swim. I guess it only starts damaging your unit in certain areas where the water's too deep. The flooding ended up being a blessing in disguise. Although half of my city was underwater at one point, my olive press wasn't even being used. Apparently, it didn't have access to olives, which was kinda weird since one of our warehouses nearby had a whole bunch. It occurred to me that I still had some favors left over. So I went and unlocked a columbarium. Since I actually had a place to bury people now, I placed down my very first Undertaker. And then I placed down a columbarium right behind it. Oh yeah, and I built a new water tower. I now just needed to connect an aqueduct to it. I started doing the same exact layout that I did earlier with the aqueduct. But unfortunately, it was way too steep in order to actually go to the water tower. I genuinely spent days and days just trying to get it to work. Right when I thought I finally had it by adding some curves to it, the Romans attacked. When I checked out the situation, I realized we might be in danger. That's a lot of soldiers. This time, I sent my militia in, and they didn't drown in the water, thankfully. They were, however, a little bit late, and the enemy units made it inside of my town. At least 4 of them. One of them was occupied by my militia, another got taken out by the guard tower, one retreated, and there was still one that I was able to pinch between my guard tower and my militia. In that moment, I realized I needed more guard towers over here. The situation finally calmed down. Then I was back at it, trying to figure out how to place that aqueduct. The most unexpected thing happened. I reached 100 happiness for just a second, and of course it then dropped back down, but I got an achievement for it. After a few more days went by of me attempting to build a stupid aqueduct, I decided that I was going to take a completely different approach. I was going to attempt attaching the water tower at the top of the mountain to the one at the bottom of the cliff. This seemed even harder than what I was going to originally try and do. My first attempt wasn't the best, but it at least looked cool. A terrible rainstorm broke out, and the city started flooding once again. This made it incredibly hard to see where I was trying to place down the aqueduct. Once the storm passed by, I tried placing down the aqueduct once again. I was genuinely upset when this attempt didn't work. I really thought it was going to. That was when it occurred to me, maybe I should just move the water tower a little bit closer, and then build an aqueduct to it. So I tried exactly that, and still couldn't get it. At this point, I was genuinely embarrassed. I could have just looked up how to do this, but as I do for all my videos, I like to figure out the game as I play it. I inspected the other aqueduct that I got working. That's when it occurred to me, I think I knew what I needed to do. This was gonna be a very long aqueduct. I went all the way around my industrial area, back over to my new residential area, and guess what? It worked. I ended up not actually constructing it though. I moved the water tower back to the original spot that I had it. I wanted the water supply from this tower to reach as many houses as it possibly could. Since I had another tower so close to it though, this didn't seem very efficient, so moving it back over to where I originally was trying to place it made more sense. Now that I actually knew how to place it, I had finally done it. I placed down the aqueduct leading to the water tower at the bottom of the cliff. I was so happy in that moment, but we're all just gonna forget that even happened. After that, I appointed a mayor that helped with tax revenue, and then I had to deal with Vulcan being mad for the millionth time. It had been a while since I actually did anything in the original part of my city on top of the mountain. This inspired me to replace one of the medium insulas with a large one. I didn't want to do both medium apartment buildings at the same time though, just because I would be risking a lot of happiness with my citizens for a short duration. A new problem started to arise in the city. A good chunk of my citizens were showing Z's above their head, meaning they weren't able to make it home and sleep a full night's rest before returning to work the next day. To resolve this, I was gonna have to build houses closer to where they were working. The only issue was though, in the industrial district where this issue was happening a lot, I couldn't place houses nearby without making them super unhappy. I observed some of the citizens that were complaining. It seemed like a lot of them had to go all the way through the top of the city down to the bottom of the cliff to get to their houses. I definitely understand why they're not making it home in time. So I decided to connect some roads from the bottom of the cliff area over to one of the roads leading to the industrial area. This should make things now a lot easier for them. With the constant expansion of the city, I now had enough workers to train cavalrymen and infantrymen. Both units trained a lot quicker than I thought they were going to. As expected, the cavalry units were super quick. They could make it through the entire city in a matter of seconds. These units seemed like they would be very good first responders. If any enemies were sneaking into the castle and we didn't have troops nearby, they would be the men for the mission. The infantry unit was a lot slower, but they seemed like they could do big damage and hold off a whole enemy army. I was so hyped to have these units a part of our new army. That was until I realized we weren't going to be able to afford them year-round. I disbanded the infantrymen and it now looked like we were back to making some gold per year. Maybe I shouldn't have done that though, because we were now being attacked by the Romans. The lower cliff farming and housing area was not sealed by a wall. I tried building a guard tower as quickly as I could to prevent any enemies from coming over here. I had a feeling they were going to focus on this area though, since it was completely open. Surprisingly enough, it looked like none of the enemy units were actually going to head over there. I sent my horsemen over to the left side of the city because I thought that it was most at risk. After they took out a couple units, it looked like they leveled up and got a star. I had some infantrymen heading over to the other side just to deal with any of the stragglers, and the horsemen were on their way to help too. Once the invasion died off, I placed down a new charcoal maker. There was literally zero charcoal in the entire city. It looked like I was losing a lot of gold again, fast. So I disbanded my horseman unit and kept my militia since it seemed like they were very cheap to maintain. I decided to increase the tax rate to 30% at the tax office at the bottom of the cliff. I then built another 2 large insulas towards the ocean side, put down a warehouse right next to them, and made 100 gold trading with a merchant. A divine task completed. This one was for growing my population to 670 citizens. I got 5 favors for doing so, which I unlocked the market building type with them. These marketplaces are basically centralized hubs that have a whole bunch of supplies that heads of houses can come by and take from. There was literally one for every single product out there. The city was still having a charcoal issue. I started constructing yet another large charcoal maker in hopes that this would fix it. I checked on my 2 new large seaside insulas. These were probably the most beautiful properties on the entire island. Sadly enough, they weren't in range to get water from the water towers though, so I was gonna have to build a new one. I planned on worrying about that later on. Right now, my people were complaining about not having enough bathhouses, so I decided to expand the one that I currently had another 3 tiles, hoping that it would resolve the issue. To my pleasant surprise, it actually did. I also got an achievement for expanding the bathhouse. A couple flourishing years went by. That was until the Romans attacked. I barely even noticed, but they were already inside of my city, almost at the center of it. This was a little bit scary because I had no clue what would happen if the outpost was destroyed. I kind of just assumed that the entire city would be destroyed, since we wouldn't have a government. I quickly trained a militia to try and deal with the enemies nearby. There was only one left, super close to my outpost. That unit ended up destroying one of the large insulas. This was pretty devastating because my outpost was already on fire, and it was for sure the next target. Oh yeah, and 3 more enemy units made it inside the city walls. The situation started to stabilize a little bit. There was only 1 enemy unit left. The old Romans found a much quicker way to get to the center of my city by sneaking in. I decided to fortify with a whole bunch of guard towers. It seemed like walls weren't keeping them out. Neptune's large temple appeared to be degrading. It actually looked like it was almost completely destroyed. I placed down a mason right next to it basically, since the other mason was out of range to repair it. The city's wood supply was now really low. I placed down 2 foresters in an uninhabited part of the forest. I then built a theater because the people were begging for one. That was when I hit 1,000 gold. It was kind of funny because we went from having no gold and a whole bunch of wood to now having a whole bunch of gold and no wood. I finally got a little bit of time and checked out what areas were covered by water towers. I then placed a water tower right next to the large insulas on the seaside and connected an aqueduct directly to it. Since I expanded with quite a few buildings outside of the walls on the main part of the island, I decided it was time to wall off those expansions. There were just way too many buildings outside of the current walls that were at risk. Although this costed me a whole bunch of stone, it was going to be worth it because I could now utilize all of the new lands inside of my walls. It always felt so exciting to see the water rushing down the aqueducts into the water towers. That's exactly what I got to see, along with some lightning striking one of my olive trees. I wasted no time at all utilizing the new land I incorporated into the city. My first course of action in it was building some roads around this giant stone node, and then building a bunch of stone mines right next to it. I then placed down a whole bunch of guard towers along the newly built giant wall. My lookouts informed me that an invading army was approaching. As usual, I enabled my archer jobs. Then I scouted out the Roman army. And let me tell you, this was the biggest invasion yet. It looked like the main force was heading over to the right side of my island, and a small detachment of ships went over to the left side. It was a little bit hard to piece together how this attack was going to play out. The Romans were doing some pretty interesting tactics that we haven't seen before. They had a huge force heading over to one side of the island, but in reality, it looked like they were dropping off troops on every single side of the city that they could. I had to keep switching over from one side of the city to the other to see which one I should pay a lot more attention to. The left side seemed to have the most enemies attacking from it. I was super happy that I built all those extra guard towers over here. It looked like I had 4 different towers shooting the enemies all at the same exact time, which completely annihilated them. The invasion literally went from the beginning of the night all the way until the middle of the next day. When I was disabling the archer job, I realized that I had 52 archers. That's a lot of guard towers. To make things a little bit easier for the woodcutters in my new area, I placed down a giant warehouse right next to them, and then 2 charcoal makers. I still didn't have enough charcoal, despite adding 2 more charcoal makers not too long ago. Surely these other 2 will get us there, hopefully. After that, I placed down another columbarium, and some roads to it. I also built a road outside of the new city walls, and another theater. Vulcan then got all upset again, as usual. I wasn't really utilizing the side of the island where I had my trading dock at. To kind of start things over there, I built a bridge. While that was being constructed, I placed down a whole bunch more grapevines since it looked like we were very low on grapes. There was quite a lot of unfertile land in the area that I built a bunch of the grapevines. To make up for that, I built a bunch of swine herds in the areas that weren't filled. I then built a bunch of olive tree farms right over some foresters. There were a lot more non-olive trees nearby that I could build more foresters on. Since I was basically converting these new lands into an agricultural area, I placed down a granary to be able to hold all the produce that was going to be produced. And who would have guessed? More pesky Romans were on their way over. As they rushed our island, it also appeared a great storm was breaking out, and flooding was about to begin. I'm really hoping that this storm works in our favor like some of them did previously. 2 decently sized Roman armies landed on my island, one attacking the front of the city and one attacking the back. Let's just say the guys in the back were not having fun. It was raining so bad that the rivers flooded, and the Romans were slowed down quite a bit as they were trying to swim up the river into our city. The same thing started happening on the other side as well, and my archers were taking full advantage of the situations. My brave militia even tried to go and help in the defense, but the flooding was so bad that they all drowned. I honestly don't think anyone's surviving this flooding. Surely enough, the gods favored us that invasion, because all enemy troops completely drowned or were eliminated by my archers. The flooding really did do a lot of damage, especially to all of the buildings at the bottom of the cliff. I decided to place a mason down there just because not all of the buildings were fully covered by one, and they needed repairs. 2 large insulas that I recently constructed needed water. They just barely fell out of range of my other water towers. Unfortunately for these 2 large apartment buildings, they weren't going to be getting any water anytime soon. I didn't have any space over there to build another water tower. My city at this point was pretty good at producing most foods and goods. The only thing that we didn't have a lot of was bread and olive oil. I figured I'd take care of the bread problem now and threw down a whole bunch of bakeries. I figured that with more food variety, I'd be able to grow the population even a bit quicker. And that was exactly my goal, since Jupiter gave me a divine task of reaching 1,220 citizens. It really looked like my increase in charcoal makers was paying off. Despite not giving the 2 large insulas any water, I decided to put a tax office right next to them. I wasn't going to let anybody escape taxes. Plus, they had well water. Something I never thought would happen, happened. I was trying to sell some goods at a merchant ship when suddenly I was prompted with some info that I was going to lose the gold I made from selling my goods. Talk about struggling from success. Talking about success, I ended up appointing a new mayor that gave insane bonuses, up to 40%. Even with the recent expansion to the city, I still felt like things were a little bit crowded. So I started planning out even more. Sooner or later, I'm planning on having this whole island filled. I did a little check-in with Ceres. It seemed like she was sufficiently happy, and I didn't really have to do much to maintain it right now. What I did have to do was build a large temple for Vulcan. I just didn't really know where I was going to place it right now, so maybe this small one will suffice. The merchant ship came back around again, but this time instead of selling things, I bought a whole bunch of bread. Over 200. Yes, the Vortian citizens do love bread that much, but I also used it to make an offering to Ceres for some favors. I then sold some generic goods to make some of that money back. I used the 5 favors that Ceres granted me to unlock the shipyard building type. This allowed me to build ships, which I'd be able to use to expand to new islands. Real quick, hit that subscribe button. We're so close to 100k. It ended up taking me a little while to actually place down a shipyard, because this building was pretty huge. Oh yeah, and I had to move my dock over a little bit just to fit it fully. The shipyard took absolutely forever to build. It was finally done though, and one merchant even came by to check it out. I put the workers in the shipyard to work right away. I had them start assembling a trimeme. This was a large cargo ship that I could potentially put a whole bunch of people onto, and maybe even send them over to another island. I was for sure gonna need a lot more citizens though if I wanted to do that. So I started building a whole bunch of insulas on the side of the island that I hadn't settled yet. The only thing over here really was a bridge, a shipyard, and a dock. Old Rome didn't seem to like my idea of expanding. They sent over a whole bunch of troops to try and stop us. I wasn't gonna let them get in the way though. I started training up a militia. The Romans also seemed pretty dedicated though. They brought a lot of troops this time, and they were pretty smart about where they were sending them. My militiamen held a choke point on a bridge. I had them hold here as this seemed like it was the side with the most enemy units. That is, if they could make it past the river, of course. Despite a little bit of fire, the other side looked like it was under control. My archer towers had it in the bag. After fending off the Romans, I consulted the gods at a new small temple I built. Despite me intending it to go to Vulcan, I dedicated it to Ceres. I guess you could call me the master rage baiter over here. Unsurprisingly, Vulcan was still angered. My two brand new insulas needed pottery and water from aqueducts. Since I had a river nearby, I decided that getting water would be pretty easy, so I built a water tower almost immediately. I then connected an aqueduct directly to it. After that, I checked on the process of my trimeme. It was so close to being completed. I just needed 13 more tools. Oh wait, I don't have any tools. I really had no clue which island I wanted to expand to first. They both looked like great choices. With the ship's construction paused, I decided to buy some more tools from the merchant. This got me enough. In the meantime, while the ship continued building, I appointed a new mayor. He was very mid. It finished. It finally finished. The trimeme was ready to go. I quickly sent it over to the nearest island and was ready to expand. That was when I read you have to have a Centuria unit on board to be able to claim lands. I literally did nothing else besides train a Centuria. Once the unit was trained, I sent it over to the nearest island. I then had my Centuria go onto the island, but apparently you had to have them in the boat to actually settle it. I loaded them back onto the ship and then saw that I wasn't able to place the outpost just anywhere. It had to be within a certain range of the boat. I had to keep adjusting my boat's position until I finally could get it into a spot that I liked. Once I got it just perfect, I placed down my first outpost. 48 villagers emerged and immediately started constructing the outpost building. I couldn't really see what was going on, so I told all of my villagers on the island to chop down all the trees nearby. It struck me in that moment that we were now considered an empire. Now I just need to keep both cities afloat. That definitely wasn't going to be easy though. My citizens experienced a drought on the brand new island. Thankfully enough, my citizens were able to build the outpost building. I then threw down a road and then a couple of hovels. With 48 citizens, I was going to have a large food supply, so I ended up building a huge wheat farm. I feel like right now, the main priority of our second island is just to survive. I only had 15 beds on this island. It seemed like I was going to be building a million hovels just to get to 50. So, I built a small insula just to get more beds as quick as possible. Honestly, I don't even know why I bothered with the hovels in the first place. I ended up replacing them with small insulas. And that was when I decided I didn't like the location of the outpost. I demolished it, and then I was looking to see where I could place down another one. And that was when it hit me. I didn't see an option to. So I pretty much just destroyed the only government building on my new island. I had absolutely zero clue how this was going to affect the island, but it seemed like nothing changed. So I just continued as normal and started building more roads deeper into the island. Nothing beats a large wheat field with a temple dedicated to Ceres in the middle of it. I was so preoccupied with the new island, I completely forgot about what was going on the main island. I still had my militia that I didn't disband from the last attack. That's when it occurred to me I wasn't going to be able to train a militia on the new island. I was finding this out at the worst time possible. 2 Roman ships were literally on their way to my new island. I had no clue what was going to happen to my new island. especially since we didn't have any guard towers on it. The Romans literally had free reign, and I thought the entire island was doomed. At this point, I had to focus in on Vortia, just because there were so many enemy troops attacking it. Also, there wasn't anything I could really do for Vortia Minimus. That was the name I chose for the new island. In a panic, I placed down 3 archer towers really quickly, since a bunch of enemies made it inside of the city walls. The ground that I placed the 3 guard towers on top of completely changed, and it looked horrible. I had no clue that was going to happen. Most of the enemies were defeated by the time they even made it close to the center of the city. Now that the Romans were dealt with, I needed to fix the land underneath the 3 guard towers that I built. I first started by destroying the guard towers, and then using the terrain editing tool. Thankfully, there was an option in it that allowed the land to return to how it was originally. When I headed over to Vortia Minimus, nothing really happened. It looked like no buildings were destroyed. And honestly, I was surprised that our population was still at 48. Since the Romans didn't really do too much damage, I decided to expand a little bit. It wasn't much, but I built some more roads, a bridge, and a stone mine. I decided to place down Vortia Minimus's first guard tower, since I knew more Roman invasions were coming. Also, I started filling the gap where my outpost once was with some more housing. I then noticed that the river behind Vortia completely dried up. So, I dug out some more land with the terrain editing tool and tried to restore it. That was when I realized that the whole reason why the river was drying up was due to one of my aqueducts. Ceres was accepting offerings of wine and grapes. So, I made 2 of them and got around 10 favors from her. I spent 9 of those favors on a theater. I then spent another 2 on cemeteries. I was pretty surprised to see that there were 4 different kinds of cemeteries I got from unlocking that single technology. I didn't end up placing any of them down yet though. I continued my effort at expanding the backside of Vortia. After a couple of roads, I threw down some large insulas. It probably wasn't the best idea, but I placed down 3 in total. Directly after, I figured what could go wrong and placed down another 2. Before all of them were constructed, I built a water tower and then an aqueduct leading directly to it. Once all the large apartments finished, the city hit over 1,000 population, and Vortia was now known as a thriving city. With that many people in it, the citizens started complaining that there weren't enough spaces for people to be buried, so I built some graveyards. I then built a fishing hut on Vortia Minimus, just because the people were super unhappy over there, and food variety seems to make everyone happy. A whole bunch of Roman ships were heading directly for my cities. They made it over to Vortia pretty quickly, and instantly went for the new apartment buildings that were built. At least, I thought they were. They actually completely ignored the new apartment buildings and went straight for the city center. When I checked in on Vortia Minimus after the raid, I saw that it was unscathed. I think the Romans knew that city had nothing but wood. Its happiness, however, did increase by around 10 points. The fishing hut was working wonders. I decided to place another one down, in hopes that it would increase the happiness of the city even more. The citizens back on Vortia wanted another bathhouse, so I decided to build one near the docks. I made this one pretty huge. When I built the aqueduct to provide this place with some water, it blocked off the complete rest of the river. This caused the thing to dry up. I of course destroyed the aqueduct and then tried using the terrain editing tool to make the river a little bit bigger. Well, that worked out really well. Once it seemed like the river was fixed, I rebuilt the bridge. I then placed down the aqueduct one more time. A little bit of the river dried up, so I decided to fix it with the terrain editing tool once again. That was when the Romans launched a full-scale attack on Vortia. Vortia Minimus only got 1 attacking unit, which wasn't bad, and they retreated almost instantly after setting a wheat field on fire. I don't know what it was, but the Romans did not want to attack my large insulas. Maybe they knew they wouldn't get any loot from doing so. The invasion went by pretty quickly and smoothly, and then it was back to terrain editing. It took me literally forever, but I redesigned all the aqueducts on the backside of Vortia. Vulcan apparently didn't like my new design. He started setting all of the aqueducts on fire. That wasn't gonna stop me though. What was gonna stop me though was I wasn't getting enough water to the bathhouse. It kept turning on and then off and then on and off. I got a little fed up with that whole situation, so I went to go check on Vortia Minimus. Since the city had grain and fish now, I decided to build some grapevines. I noticed that the population dropped by 11 though. Apparently, my colonists weren't enjoying this place, or they just died. After that little break, I returned to trying to build an aqueduct to my bathhouse. I wasn't very successful at doing so, so I decided to do the only thing that I could, make the bathhouse smaller and hope that it doesn't require as much water then. This actually ended up working surprisingly enough. The bathhouse was now fully operational. Since I got that out of the way, I built another large insula. I also built a huge grapevine field since I was using all of my grapes on wine. I then noticed that my aqueduct leading to the bathhouse was blocking off the river. So out of rage, I just completely destroyed the bathhouse as well as the aqueduct. I had a feeling an aqueduct just was not going to work out on this side of the island. So I went over to the other river and decided to build one over there. This one was so far away from all of the housing, but it was gonna have to do. When my workers got to work building it, I decided to build some more grapevines, and also 2 more large insulas where the old bathhouse used to be. Across from the grapevines, I built a whole bunch of olive trees. I then built a gate leading directly into the city. I was surprised that I didn't think about doing this sooner. The Romans were back again. It seemed like they were back at their pesky little schemes. You would think that at this point they would have come up with some new strategies instead of trying to sneak in and set things on fire. Maybe that's why Rome collapsed. As expected, the Romans did basically no damage. It was kind of weird because one of the Roman units froze up on Vortian Minimus and was just standing there. I didn't have any infantrymen to go and attack them, so I built a guard tower within range. While it was building, I came across their boat that they were supposed to escape on. It seemed to be getting stuck on the mainlands of Vortia. I threw down a new guard tower in the new residential area behind the city. I then completed a whole bunch of divine tasks. I didn't really understand how I was able to complete so many, until I realized they were Vulcan's tasks. He finally wasn't mad at me anymore. I in theory was progressing with all of those, I just never was able to redeem them since he was mad at me. I used the favors from him to unlock a butcher, salt evaporation pool, and then a chariot racetrack. I decided to build a couple salt evaporation tools on the beach I had quite a few buildings on. This seemed like the perfect place to put them, since they needed to be near water. After placing those down, I checked out the chariot racetrack. This thing was absolutely gigantic, and I wasn't sure where I wanted to build it. After careful consideration, I placed one down next to the new olive tree farms. If the shipyard took a long time to build, this was gonna take extra long. Ceres appeared, and that was when I noticed that she was mad at me. I honestly was shocked that she was the one who was mad. She literally had the most temples and even had a large temple. It just made no sense. I even understood why Vulcan was mad at me. The racetrack provided a huge happiness bonus to all buildings nearby. It occurred to me that my new salt evaporation buildings weren't protected by any means, so I decided to place down a guard tower right next to them. It also appeared that we were running out of wine. The citizens in the large insulas were consuming it like crazy. The racetrack almost finished constructing. It even looked like people were racing around despite there being scaffolding inside of the arena. This building was so epic. I really hadn't put up a lot of decorations, so I decided maybe I should start doing so and making the city look a little bit nicer. Plus, it should increase happiness. I envisioned that a whole bunch of these little archways would look really cool. I guess we'll find out. They could look terrible after they get built. Ceres made another appearance, and this time I actually talked to her. She said that she was mad at me, and I decided to just pay her some gold to make her not mad. Honestly, I regret not doing that with Vulcan, instead of letting him be mad at me for hundreds of days. I was a bit confused at this point, because the racetrack said it was finished constructing, but the scaffolding was still all over it. I felt like it was time to lock in on Vortian Minimus. We were down to 26 citizens on it, and things just kept getting worse, it seemed like. I tried adjusting the jobs to the best that I could, to make sure we were still getting a good balance of different kinds of food. After that, I finally built the aqueduct to the new bathhouse, and saw the weirdest thing ever. Somebody had pooped on the road. I don't think any kind of training could have prepared me for that one. Apparently though, I was gonna have to construct some public toilets, because they clearly were needed. I was absolutely stumped at this point, because an immigrant ship showed up to Vortian Minimus, and nobody decided to stay. I honestly had no clue how to make the people on that island happy. It seemed like anything I did didn't help. To make matters even worse, the Romans attacked. It seemed like they were trying something different this time. Instead of sneaking in, I saw some units directly attacking my walls. The rest of the enemy units attempted their usual. I of course had my militia setting up a choke point. Honestly, I think the militia unit is the most important in the game. They train really quickly and don't cost a lot to maintain. Also, it seemed like utilizing rivers was incredibly overpowered. Most of the Roman units drowned in the water, and if you pair that up with a whole bunch of archer towers, you basically have an impenetrable city. Even if the enemy units don't drown in the water all the time, they at least get slowed down. Ceres appeared on Vortian Minimus, and of course, she was complaining she was upset again. I kind of just ignored her at first, but then I realized how bad the city was doing. So I bribed her to go away and not cause any issues because we were already struggling enough over here. I checked back in with the chariot racetrack, and it seemed like the scaffolding had finally gone away. The chariots were now actually competing. It was in that moment that it struck me. We had built up a giant empire, the Vortian Empire, and even though it wasn't perfect, it was something pretty huge. There were a lot more struggles yet to come, especially with Vortian Minimus, the newest city in our empire. I honestly wasn't sure if it was going to survive, but I sure was going to try and do my best to make sure it does. I really was stumped on what else I could do for Vortian Minimus. They had fish, wheat, and even grapes. You would think that would keep people happy, but apparently not. In a last-ditch effort, I decided to try building some apple trees. Not a lot of them, but just a few. If fish, wheat, and grapes wasn't working, then maybe fish, wheat, apples, and grapes will. I made sure to actually assign workers to these tree farms as well. It was now a waiting game to see if the happiness of Vortian Minimus would increase. So I headed back over to Vortia and then started to look what I still needed to unlock in the technology tree. Since there was literal poop on my streets, I decided to look into getting the public toilets. I had to unlock fountains and then I could unlock public toilets. The only thing is, I wasn't close to unlocking any more favors from any of the gods. While I was thinking how I could achieve these divine tasks, I noticed that one of my water storages was completely destroyed, and all of the large insulas nearby were complaining they needed an aqueduct with water. I quickly repaired the water storage because this was obviously lowering my happiness in Vortia. I also realized I hadn't selected a new governor. I quickly appointed a new one that had all positive traits. This increased the city's happiness almost instantly. With the water storage now repaired, I built an aqueduct directly to it. I was a little bit concerned though this was going to drain the water of the river, which it looked like it did. I was gonna have to go back and play around with the aqueduct, but before doing so, I placed down a mason within range of my docks. They were basically falling apart, so this was well needed. It was then fix the aqueduct time. Thankfully enough, it didn't take me too long to figure it out. That's because I had quite a bit of experience placing these aqueducts now. I was also trying something new. I branched off the aqueduct from one that already existed. So I was curious to see how this was going to impact the water flow since it was already being divided later down the road. I was on a roll, finding all the things wrong with Vortia and at least trying to fix them. The next one that I came across was some more buildings that weren't being maintained. So I destroyed one of the bakeries which wasn't really being utilized for bread, and I ended up placing down a mason in its spot. That was when Neptune appeared and was pretty mad. I gave him an offering of around 600 gold coins, and then he left Vortia alone. Not without leaving damage, of course. My newly branched off aqueduct started flowing water through it. 125 water made it to that water storage. I then checked the other two branched off water storages to see what was going on with those. Each of those only had 62 water flowing into it. The citizens in the large insulas nearby didn't seem to mind. Each large insula only needed 8 liters each. I had a pretty crazy aqueduct idea. Since I ended up having 6 or 7 aqueducts in one river and only 3 in the other, I tried seeing how far I could build an aqueduct. That was when the Romans attacked, and I immediately had to stop, pause, and make sure my archers were enabled. I did the same on Vortian Minimus, but the attack wasn't looking too intense over there. Since infantrymen and cavalrymen were very expensive, I didn't want to have just a whole bunch sitting by. I planned on expanding my guard tower defenses by a lot to make sure that they were sufficient and taking out all of the enemies. And currently for this attack, they definitely were. I did train a militia unit because they're very cheap, but I realized that all of the enemies were already taken out, so I didn't even need it. After we successfully repelled the Romans, I checked on Vortian Minimus. It seemed like Ceres was mad, so I offered her 45 gold coins and she left the small village alone. It looked like its population though was dropping again, which wasn't good. I was very confused though because the happiness of the city was pretty stable. I decided to maybe just give it some more time, and more people will start showing up since the happiness is fairly high. I then continued seeing how far I could push the aqueducts to their limits. And let me tell you, these things can go on for basically forever. This allowed me to place down a water storage in a spot that I didn't think I was going to be able to, since the river water nearby was too low. I then built literally the longest aqueduct ever all the way over to the new water storage. I was pretty excited that I was able to do this because I could now utilize this new area for more housing. Vortian Minimus's population dropped down to 26. So I did some hard investigation, and that was when I realized what was making it fail. None of the medium insulas had pottery. I completely forgot that this was required for medium insulas, and it was making the village's happiness hit a floor. I started to think through my options on what I could do for the island. I could really only destroy the medium insulas and replace them with hovels, or I could start producing pottery. The issue with the latter was though, I didn't have enough workers to do so really. Funny enough, the large insulas near my docks required pottery as well, so I fixed that issue before doing anything on Vortian Minimus. And of course, Vulcan was mad as always. Shortly after, I got a little bit distracted and built a trimeme and some centuria. I planned on expanding to the third island in this world. Honestly, this was an absolutely crazy idea because I didn't have Vortian Minimus under control. But I said screw it and decided that I was gonna test my luck over on the third island. Before doing so though, I wanted to build up my dock area a little bit. I built a warehouse and stockpile. I then finally sent my settlers over to the third island. As I was looking for a place to put down my outpost, the Romans invaded again. They always attack at the worst times. I also didn't have any archers in any of my guard towers, so this was a little bit concerning. The enemy Romans were able to rush my tax collectors, grab some gold coins, and try and escape. I attempted to block them in, but I was honestly concerned I was about to lose a bunch of money. I only ended up losing 100 gold, as only one enemy Roman unit escaped with my coins. The other one that had some coins, I took out. It seemed like the rest of the Romans weren't here for gold, and they were just looking for pure destruction. They didn't last very long though. I finally got back to trying to place down my new outpost on the third island. I checked out all the different sides of the island, and ended up liking the one that I went to originally. I realized I completely forgot about my issue on Vortian Minimus. I headed there and destroyed all of the small insulas and then placed down an outpost. This looked like it was recently added to the menu. Shout out to the Nova Roma devs. After replacing down my outpost that once existed, I placed down a whole bunch of hovels. This in theory should stop lowering the happiness of my citizens by not requiring pottery in their living space. Vortian Minimus should be set now. I made my way back over to the third island and finally placed down the outpost. It was kind of crazy because as I was doing so, lightning struck the island. I ended up placing down the outpost right in the area that it struck at. I took this as a sign that that was the best spot to settle on the entire island. Real quick, if you're enjoying the video, hit that subscribe button. We're so close to 100k. I couldn't really see the new outpost behind all of the trees on the island, so I had my new settlers chop most of them down within a few block radius. I then built a main road directly in front of the outpost, like I do with every city. Of course, housing came after that. We now had a couple houses, a main road. All I needed was some food. So I built some apple trees right behind the outpost. I had quite a lot of workers to spare since we had around 50 citizens. So I placed down a fishing hut and then built a long road directly to it. I realized I didn't place down enough houses to actually have enough beds for my current citizen amount. So I placed some more down. I then built a stone mine and a road directly to it. I still had 15 idle citizens, so this was the perfect way to put some of them to work. Last but not least, I placed down some wells next to all of the hovels. It was now time to wait for Vortian Minimus and the third island to grow their populations. I felt like I was waiting for plants to grow or something. In the meantime though, I started expanding my roads around the docks as I wanted to build this area up. Funny enough, Neptune appeared right at the docks. He said he was mad and started flooding my docks, which didn't really make much sense. So I thought it was kind of funny and just left him be. After that, I realized we were really low on iron. I destroyed a guard tower and placed down an iron mine in its space, and obviously replaced the guard tower one tile over. The land near the docks seemed to be very fertile. I was pretty hyped about this because it meant that I could continue expanding my agricultural area all the way over to here. The only thing I didn't like about it was that we didn't have walls surrounding it. So I decided to do something crazy and started building walls directly along the coastline. My idea was to completely wall off as much of the coast as I could over here and make sure that enemies wouldn't be able to land. I even started taking things one step further, and I walled off some more of the coast that wasn't even nearby. It occurred to me in that moment I wanted to wall off this entire island and only have certain entry points that I control. So that's exactly what I started doing, as I had a lot of stone. Of course, the Romans came in to foil my plans again. I could see why they wouldn't want a giant wall going almost all the way around my island. I would be able to control almost all of their invasions to come from one certain area. As for now, I was gonna have to deal with them having free reign on anything that wasn't inside of the walls of my city. I realized that I was gonna need to place down some archer towers at my docks, as this was definitely gonna be the entry point to my island. Honestly, the situation didn't look very good. I had some enemy units pretty deep inside of my city. I was pretty confident that my guard towers were gonna be able to handle them though. So I started placing a bunch of guard towers along the new coast walls that I built, and then started watching the invasion. It ended pretty quickly, and then I started walling off the other peninsula next to the one that I had just done. Let me tell you, these walls looked pretty cool around the river. I checked in on Vortian Minimus, and we did it. The population grew. So I placed down some more hovels, and then headed over to the third island. It seemed like the population over here stayed pretty static. I just needed to give the village a little bit more time to grow. I then noticed on Vortia, I was 3 people away from having the max population. So I built some more large insulas. 3 more to be exact. I tried placing down a 4th one, but it kinda destroyed the land a little bit. So I removed it. I quickly appointed a new mayor since we needed one, and then started fixing the land that the large insula had messed up. After that, I checked in on the third island, and it turned out that my people weren't happy because we didn't have enough food. I placed down a few more apple tree farms and then some wheat fields to resolve this. It turned out that the people on the third island though wanted a forum, so I destroyed a hovel and built one, but the people were still not satisfied. So I ended up expanding the forum a little bit more. This still didn't do the trick, so I made the forum even bigger. Now that things were a little bit more calmed down on all of the islands, I continued my effort of walling off Vortia. I honestly made a lot more progress than I thought I was going to doing so. I then headed over back to the newest agricultural area and completely filled the peninsula with wheat fields. That wasn't going to be enough though, so I went all in right outside of the chariot racing building and built a ginormous wheat field. When I checked in on the new island's forum, it looked like the people still weren't happy. I had no clue what to do at this point. The forum was already pretty huge, and I didn't want to waste more resources building it even bigger. The Romans decided that it was time to pay us a visit. Honestly, my half-walled-off island was already working a little bit. The Romans, for the most part, seemed to only be landing near the docks, which was the only area not walled off, besides the other side of the island, of course. I really needed to start walling off over there, though. The enemies have been taking advantage of this little secret way in for the longest time. I noticed that there were quite a lot of them that actually went directly through the center of my city. I don't know how they made it up there so quickly, but they were doing the weirdest thing ever, and not actually destroying any of my buildings. This made me very confused, and I had no clue what was going on, but I trained a militia unit just in case. After some time passed, I took out all of the enemy Romans, besides one that escaped. I honestly think that that attack was just to see how quickly they could get in and out of my city while going through the entire thing. Although this was concerning, I was pretty happy that nothing bad happened. I was very concerned, however, though, so I started walling off the side of the island that the enemies were able to sneak in from and have been sneaking in from. The elevation on it was a little bit wonky though. This made me not able to place walls on the edge of the island, so I had to do what I could. It wasn't perfect, but it's all I could do. Also, in theory, if some of the tiles were too steep to have walls put on top of them, maybe they'll be too steep for the Romans to land on. I was impressed with how big this agricultural area became. I figured, since I was fixing everything on the island, I might as well build some more temples and improve the city's relationship with the gods. It seemed like everything on Vortia was coming together. Yeah, I was the one who was actually doing it, but each area I divided the island into just kinda seemed to work out. The city's population was getting close to max again. I laid out a brand new residential area. Since I knew I was gonna be expanding over here, I needed to have houses for all of the jobs that were gonna open up nearby. And what do you know? More Romans arrived. They landed exactly at the areas that I left open, and my new defenses seemed to hold them back pretty well. Vortian Minimus survived the invasion, and it was doing much better than just surviving. We hit max population, so I placed down my very first small insula. Well, very first relative to after when I destroyed them all. This was huge, because I could now place down some clay pits, and then start producing my own pottery on this island. I dedicated the most recent temple that I built to Neptune. He was the only god that was currently mad at me. But then, right as I dedicated it to him, Vulcan got jealous, and now he was mad at me. So I decided to build another 2 temples. My new residential area also needed a water storage. I built one at a pretty low elevation while still keeping it next to the large insulas recently built, and then started mapping out an aqueduct. I had to kinda snake the aqueduct in between all of the buildings that were in the way between the water source and the new water storage. After that, I dedicated one of the 2 new temples to Vulcan, since he got jealous about Neptune's temple. He was still mad at me, so I dedicated another one to him, and then Jupiter got mad about this. He started lightning striking a bunch of my wheat fields. I kind of just let him have his crash out, since lightning wasn't too effective against open fields. It also seemed like the gods were always trying to start something. Who would have thought that they could get jealous? I noticed that some of the roads in my residential area looked like they were being destroyed. To prevent this, I placed down a mason nearby, so they would actually maintain the roads and all of the structures in this new area. The pork levels in Vortia were getting low. I placed down a whole bunch of swine herds to fix this. I then continued expanding my new residential area. For some reason, Jupiter was still mad at me, and I hadn't completed any divine tasks in such a long time. So we really have hit a plateau in terms of technology. With no real progress being made in terms of favors, I decided to head back over to Vortian Minimus. This village had been around for such a long time. I figured that it was time to give it some walls, at least wooden ones. Unlike with the whole insula situation on this island, I decided to start off small, and only walled off the perimeter of the village. Of course, I accompanied the walls with some gates. It was invasion time once again. A large chunk of the enemies flooded my docks, but it still seemed like there were a whole bunch of boats sailing right past them. I was kind of hoping that all of the enemies landed over here. There were little edges of the coast that the Romans were still able to land their ships on. That wasn't really a big deal, since it was only like 1 or 2 units at each little edge, hence the few straggling boats. I elected a new mayor to keep happiness up, and then I built some more farms. It seemed like food was a continuous problem for the city, since we were constantly expanding. I also noticed that the river that had a bunch of aqueducts in it wasn't flowing all the way down anymore. The aqueducts were blocking it, so I had to mess around with the land a little bit. Afterwards, I built a new forum right next to the new residential area, and that was when Jupiter attacked my docks. This was becoming too much, so I placed down a temple that I could dedicate to him. I did so the second that it was constructed. When I finally checked to see if he was happy, he wasn't, and I was just completely baffled at this point. I literally just dedicated another large temple to him. It seemed like Vortia was now the city that was struggling. One of the 2 rivers on it was almost completely dried up, and Jupiter kept attacking it. Who would have thought that Vortian Minimus was now the city that wasn't really having any problems? Same with Vortia Continuous. That's just the temporary name that I gave the third island. Comment down below what you think I should name it. Vortia is really coming together, and the island looked awesome. What the heck is going on with these walls over here though? At this point, I didn't know if the water towers made the land nearby more fertile. This inspired me to try placing out some grapevines on tiles that I couldn't before. Oh nice, that actually worked. Of course, if I was going to build more grapevines, I had to throw down another road so people could actually access them. That's when I came back to the river that was halfway dried up, and realized that I couldn't really do anything with it. I thought that maybe I would be able to replace some of the aqueducts I currently had built with water from the other one. While trying to plan out the logistics of that in my head, I placed down a tool maker, since we literally only had one tool. I then checked on Vortian Minimus, and appointed a new mayor, as they needed one. I wanted to pay special attention to this city, just so the happiness didn't fall like crazy again. What did end up falling though, was the bridge to the stone mine. I'm assuming the river flooded and somehow destroyed it. Of course, I rebuilt the bridge, a little bit longer this time, and also threw down a new stone mine. So we had a total of 2 now on Vortian Minimus. Uh-oh, the Romans are attacking again. I prepared the guards at each city, and then watched the Romans pour in with their boats. That looks like a lot of them, oh my gosh. Even though they were my enemy, their fleet looked pretty epic. It looks like they changed up their attack style again. Instead of just flooding one part, they're going all around the city. Their new strategy wasn't very effective. Plus, it seemed like they were using the dried up river as one of their ways to get in, which I was planning on fixing sometime soon. I for sure need to build some guard towers over here. I don't think there's a single one. The Romans really were only able to breach the first level of wall that I had. They were no longer making it to the core of the city like previously, before I had the outermost wall. The current mayor of Vortia got a 20% discount on any goods we trade for. So I decided to send it and bought 144 tools. This allowed me to finish off all of the divine tasks for Vulcan. Only 3 more gods to go. I spent the first of my favors on fountains, and then the rest on public toilets. I first checked out the fountains, but didn't place any. Then, I placed down a whole bunch of public toilets. I didn't want any more poop in the streets, to say the least. Real quick, if you're enjoying the video, hit that subscribe button. We're so close to 100k. The next time the merchant comes around, I'm gonna be buying some bread. The citizens were once again unhappy since they didn't have enough bathhouses. I tried expanding this one over here to see if it would fulfill their need for more. Vortian Minimus was thriving. 96% happiness isn't bad. It was lacking charcoal though. We had 0. I built a large charcoal maker right next to the clay pit. That should solve our charcoal problem. I replaced 2 hovels with a small insula. I also ended up doing another 2. The first one caught on fire immediately, which might have been a bad sign. But luckily my citizens put out the fire almost instantly. Vortia Continuous was also ready for some small insulas. To actually sustain them though, I had to place down a clay pit, a pottery maker, and a large charcoal maker. Oh yeah, and a guard tower. It was finally time to try and replace some of the aqueducts on the river that ran out of water. I was surprised because I was actually able to do one on my first try. I then attempted to do one on the front side of the island. But of course, the Romans attacked. I paused, stopped designing my aqueduct, and then had to tell my guards to go to their towers. I was completely caught off guard by them. The notification didn't seem to appear since I was in the aqueduct editor. Luckily, my other 2 cities already had their guards in position. It was just Vortia that didn't. The Romans switched up their strategy, and all poured in exactly where I wanted them to. They were still able to do quite a bit of damage though, more than what I expected. I'm gonna have to throw down some more guard towers. One there, maybe over here, there, and there. Surely enough, when I was looking at Vortian Minimus, Vulcan decided to rain down lightning on Vortia. He chose to do it over my crops, and wanted 860 gold coins to stop. Since he was mostly hitting my grapevines, I decided not to pay the gold to calm him down. It didn't seem worth it. If you want to get more involved in the Vortide community, check out the Discord link down below. This guy's still going, it's literally been a whole day. It looked like he did a whole lot of damage, but honestly, it wasn't bad, once again, since it was just grapevines. Vortia Continuous was adjusting well to the insulas, so I placed down a couple more. I then finally got back to replacing aqueducts, after I was so rudely interrupted. It took me a while, but I finished one that went almost entirely across my whole island. Honestly, not sure why I didn't put grapevines over here sooner. We always need more. My builders finished constructing the really long aqueduct. It honestly took like 30 seconds before the water even started flowing all the way to it. That didn't take long at all. With the water storage now being replenished, I placed down some more large insulas. I had a divine task where I needed to reach 2,200 citizens, or at least around there. Ceres was enraged over on Vortian Minimus. She decided to rain havoc over there, but I was able to pay her off for a very small sum of gold. So I did. We all know the history of this island. I noticed that the happiness was kinda low, and was slightly concerned, but I continued my business and placed down some more insulas. A unique opportunity presented itself. I needed to give Ceres a whole bunch of bread, and I had quite a bit of gold. I bought around 200 bread total. I then offered 77 of it and 91 gold to her, and completed all of Ceres' divine tasks. I don't know why I waited so long to just buy these materials and give it to the gods. I spent a lot of the favors on dams and spillway. I then tried placing down my very first dam. Of course, there was a drought going on in the moment, so I didn't have a lot of water to work with. I tried laying one out on Vortian Minimus, and honestly, these things were goated. It seemed like the dam was able to collect a whole bunch of water, even with this drought going on. I could even control how much water goes through the dam with a spillway. Let's just say water management is about to get a whole lot easier. I of course canceled that dam, since I didn't really need one there right now, and headed over to Vortia Continuous. I placed down a small stockpile and small storehouse, since the city was growing. I then elected a new governor. Vortian Minimus also needed a new governor, and so did Vortia. It was going to be easy to track when I needed to elect new governors now for all 3 islands, since the terms lined up. Oh gosh, again? Jupiter was pissed, but this time he was actually attacking an area that kind of mattered. So, I paid the gold to make him happy. It was around 831 gold to be exact. The happiness on Vortia dropped quite a bit. The people wanted a new columbarium since the old one was getting filled. I placed one on the uninhabited peninsula of Vortia. I was already planning on expanding out this way, so might as well start now. Well, look who's back. The Romans were up to their usual shenanigans. I even saw them try swimming up a river, which was pretty hilarious. I wanted to make it hard for any other Romans that try to take this approach in the future, so I placed down another guard tower right next to the river. Over by the Romans' main forces, they had made it through one of my gates, and were heading directly for a temple. That didn't go very well for them. Vortia Continuous's population grew quite a bit. They were now running low on food, so I placed down some grapevines. Vortia Minimus was in the same boat, so I also built some more food sources over there. The citizens then complained about not having enough shops. Of course, I placed down some food counters and barbers to make the people happy. The river that was half dried up was now flowing all the way through. My idea with the aqueducts actually worked out. I now wanted to place a dam, just to ensure we never run out of water in this river again. My first attempt was a dam only 2 tiles wide. This didn't work out though because it needed to be at least 3 to have a spillway. My second attempt at building one though was perfect. Now we just need to wait for this thing to build. Believe it or not, building a dam was one of Neptune's divine tasks that was holding me back. After completing a chain of them, I ended up with 19 favors, which was insane. I spent 12 of them on grand temples. Maybe I can finally make Jupiter happy with one of these. I also spent another 5 on large bakeries. I was severely lacking bread, so I thought this might be able to help a little bit. I quickly headed to the peninsula of Vortia and placed down a grand temple. And let me tell you, this thing was massive. The merchant ship had come around, and I needed wine. This was the perfect opportunity to complete another divine task for Neptune. Weirdly enough, the merchant wasn't selling wine directly, so I bought 200 grapes, and that paid off after a while. Jupiter was now the only god that I didn't complete all of the divine tasks for. I was pretty happy because that meant only one god could be mad at me now. I was really happy with the dam on the other river. I decided to build another dam on the other river. I then checked in on the Grand Temple. It literally just finished building as I headed over there. I of course dedicated it to Jupiter, since he was the last one that I had to impress. I was hoping that this was going to make him no longer mad at me, That's exactly what it did. I could now actually see his population task. This divine task counted the total number of population I had from all 3 islands. It didn't just have to be on Vortia. So I headed over to Vortia Minimus, and then replaced 2 small insulas with a medium one. Back on Vortia, I placed down a water storage at the base of the peninsula. I could now expand some more apartment buildings over here once I get some water flowing. That didn't take very long. With the residential area growing over here, I placed down a granary, a stockpile, and a warehouse. Then the Romans attacked, in a very spread out formation though. A lot of the Romans landed at my port, but they got taken out almost instantly because of all of the new guard towers. Even though I didn't need one yet, I decided to place a dam on Vortia Minimus. I then continued expanding the new residential area with more large insulas. I also decided I was going to start utilizing the forest near the harbor as well. With Vortia Minimus now having a medium insula on it, I needed to build an aqueduct to a water storage. Unfortunately, I didn't have enough stone yet. Looks like we're gonna have to wait on that one. It was time to appoint all the governors on each island. I then noticed that there was poop on my streets again. I thought that the public toilets had dealt with this, but apparently not. So I had to build some more. After building more public toilets, I got an achievement saying that I hoarded 5,000 gold. That was pretty impressive. I was attributing it to our population growth, since there were a lot more people to tax now. I decided to start walling off Vortia Continuous, just because we had a lot of stone there, and also I did it on Vortia, and it seemed to be working out pretty well. If only I had this much stone on Vortia Minimus. Funny enough, the people were actually unhappy for the same reason they were on Vortia Minimus just a second ago. They didn't have any shops or barbers or food counters. This was an easy fix. Vortia's best friend launched another attack on us. I was surprised though, this time they only sent over 17 ships. Previously, we were seeing around 22 to 25. I wonder if Old Rome had other enemies they needed to fight off. It barely took half a day for us to finish off the invading forces, and then things were back to normal. One thing that I didn't notice happen during the invasion was that the Romans attacked the bathhouse. I know Vortia has multiple, but I'm talking about the giant one. Now that's just not cool, man. On Vortia Continuous, I decided that it was time I get down a water tower, especially considering I wanted to expand to some medium insulas. Things were going to be a little bit embarrassing for Vortia Minimus though, especially if Vortia Continuous got an aqueduct before they did. Fortunately for that island, Vortia Continuous didn't have enough stone to finish off the aqueduct, but they were a lot closer than Vortia Minimus. As I was planning out more defenses, I found out that I could place guard towers inside of stone walls, which was pretty awesome. I don't know how I didn't realize this until now. I hadn't placed down a fountain yet, so I finally placed down 4 in the new residential area. I then used some of my favors to unlock a bath library, which was kind of a weird concept, but hey, if it makes the people happy. I placed one down right next to my massive bathhouse. After that, I planned out the most optimum spot for a water storage in Vortia Minimus currently. Didn't these guys just attack? The Romans came at us, full force. This time, they all came from one side, but then split into 2 massive groups. Now's not the time to visit, merchant. A lot of the enemies landed on the front side of my island where I didn't have walled off, which made sense. I wasn't sure if the enemies were going to be able to penetrate the wall this time. If they did, then I'm going to want to throw down a lot more guard towers, but things ended up working out pretty well. Well, that was easy. Despite annihilating the Romans, I still decided to build more guard towers on this side of the island. Knowing that I could actually build them inside of the walls was super handy. I once again tried laying out an aqueduct on Vortia Minimus. Unfortunately, I still didn't have enough stone. I was for sure going to need around 250 to make it all the way over here. I hit a combined population of over 2,200. I had now completed the final task for Jupiter. I was a little bit concerned though, because I still had quite a bit more to research and I only had 7 favors. That fear faded away once I remembered that I could host festivals and get 5 favors from each festival. I found the cheapest one that I could host and then actually hosted it, gaining myself the 5 favors. I spent 10 on a gladiator school, which seemed pretty awesome. Now the issue was trying to find some land to place this massive thing on. I ended up choosing a spot at the base of the Vortian Peninsula, where I was building the new residential area at. This seemed like the logical spot, because there would be a lot of people living nearby it that would maybe want to become gladiators. It was also one of the only areas on the island that still had space left. I noticed that I could also unlock a Colosseum. I didn't know how huge it was going to be, but I'm assuming it's going to be a similar size to the chariot racing arena. Let's just hope that I have space on Vortia to actually build it. Whoa, that was an insane harvest. The merchant stopped by, and I bought 1,000 grapes for 2,000 gold, just because I had money like that. I also bought 500 olives since I was kinda low on them. Over on Vortia Minimus, there was quite a bit of flooding. I had to increase the amount of water that the dam let out just so things didn't get worse, and even then it was still flooding quite a bit. Luckily, I didn't really have too many buildings in the area, besides the stone mines. The storm finally cleared up, and my gladiator school finished constructing. I already saw some people training in it. Sadly, the building wasn't fully operational though. I didn't have enough staff running it yet. I also realized that I placed the building sideways, so the entrance didn't have a street connecting to it. This is going to be a pain and a half to rebuild. The whole water situation on Vortia was a little bit complicated. I had so many aqueducts coming from both rivers that one of them would dry out if I added another. So, to make things work, I had to build a really long aqueduct, all the way from the only other river on one side of the island, all the way to the complete other side of Vortia. I needed some more favors from the gods, but since I completed all of their divine tasks, the only way to get some was by holding festivals. So I hosted 2 for Vulcan and got 10 favors. Oh boy, more of these guys. I now had 12 favors, which I used on unlocking the Colosseum. I already had a pre-planned space in my head on where it was going to go, and thankfully enough, it fit right in there. Finally, after all of that time, construction began. And of course the Romans attacked too. The Colosseum wasn't my only working project. I wanted to play around with dams and controlling water a little bit more, since I didn't really utilize it much yet. I built a pretty large dam on Vortia Continuous, and then experimented with a spillway. The only issue was, I couldn't actually afford the dam that I wanted to build. It was time to get more stone mines going. When I finally had enough stone, I built a very small dam just to get the project started. I was planning on expanding this to what I modeled earlier. And of course, Vulcan's mad for some odd reason. Ironically, even though Vulcan was mad, I hosted a festival for Neptune. He got lucky though, since I needed some more favors, so I ended up hosting one for him anyways. The Colosseum finished building. It only took a year and a half. This thing looked awesome. But unfortunately, I couldn't actually play any games, since that feature wasn't released yet. But I did see some gladiators fighting off a lion in the center of the arena. As an alternative way to earn favors, I bet on chariot races. I really didn't have enough resources to keep hosting festivals for all of the gods so often. Alright, let's hope my guy actually wins this. Oh my gosh. It's neck and neck. Come on. Bruh. Sadly, the racer I bet on didn't win. So, I bet again, and unfortunately lost a second time. That was enough betting for now. I decided to recruit some gladiators. I trained them in the arts of beast taming specifically. These guys will definitely be ready for the Colosseum. Vortia really came a long way, and the city was prospering, but I wanted it to be considered a city of the gods, which required a population of 5,000 citizens. I of course started building a new residential area. We were only 2,900 citizens away, so not too bad. Over on Vortia Minimus, I got word that I completed an extremely long aqueduct. No way, that thing just finished building now? That took forever. Maybe we'll finally be able to produce enough iron now. A drought hit the city, which unfortunately shut down a lot of our public toilets. The drought wasn't the only thing hitting our city. The Romans were on their way to attack. Vortia Minimus's very first aqueduct completed, and water was finally flowing to the city. After all of these years, I could now actually support medium insulas on this island, and maybe large ones too. Vortia Continuous also seemed to be thriving, maybe even a little bit more than Vortia Minimus. It even collected a lot more stone. I was now able to build another layer to the dam. I think we have a poop problem over here. That's nasty. Let's hope more public toilets take care of this. There were whispers amongst the people on Vortian Minimus that they needed some more bathhouses. I decided that I was going to build them the biggest bathhouse they'd ever seen. Over time, of course. I had to fight off some Roman invaders, host a festival for Vulcan, and then unlock the gym, which I could add on to my bathhouse. It appears that the different part of the bathhouses give different bonuses, and those bonuses are determined based on the section's size. In other words, I was going to have to also build a giant gym in addition to the cold pools. Over at my dam on Vortian Continuous, there was a little bit of flooding based off of how I was building this thing. I handled the situation though, don't worry. Oh, I also got an achievement for containing a massive volume of water. I guess the flooding helped with that one. This thing's not looking so good right now. Another festival happened, and I unlocked the hot pool. This building type required charcoal to heat water, which allowed the citizens to basically have a hot tub. Oh no, Vortian Continuous is getting flooded from the other side now. Much better. The Romans were putting a bit more pressure on Vortian Minimus. I decided it was time to wall off the entire island, just like I did on Vortia. Looks like I won't be needing the wooden walls anymore. I realized I could also start using the trade boat to buy a bunch of wine so I could host more and more festivals to get favors. That's exactly what I did. The current governor on Vortia allowed us to get a 40% discount on traded goods, which was awesome. The bathhouse was really coming together. I had also just unlocked the very last building type that I could add on to the bathhouses, a bath garden. This should help out with my lack of stone on Vortian Minimus. My luxurious bathhouse completed. At least that's what the citizens considered it. It was pretty massive though, if you ask me, and had a whole bunch of different parts to it. Over at the dam on Vortian Continuous, I started to remodel it by expanding it a little bit so it could hold even more water. I then hosted quite a few more festivals and unlocked 4 new technologies. The Romans kept trying to take us down, but at this point, I'm surprised they didn't realize they didn't have a chance. It did seem like their plan of attack changed though. They really seemed to be focusing this side of the island. I continued upgrading the dam even taller. That was when I got an achievement for containing an absurd amount of water. Let's just hope one of these walls doesn't break ever. Vortia wasn't the only island getting an expansion. On Vortian Continuous, I started mapping out a whole new residential area. This island was gonna expand fast. What is going on over here? I guess with the bigger population comes a bigger poop problem. The Empire of Vortia hit a huge milestone. It had survived for 200 years now. Take that, Romans. I really only had one goal left for the Empire. And that was to expand one of the cities to a city of the gods. Since I already kind of started doing this on Vortia, I continued by placing houses in every single spot that I possibly could. I even started taking down sections of the city that I knew I could replace with housing without causing the city to destabilize. This change in things though did require a lot more wood, so I started placing foresters in every nook and cranny that I could. Vortian Continuous also seemed to have the same exact wood shortage problem, which was caused by the expansions on the island too. Exactly what I didn't want to happen, happened. The Romans invaded and they completely destroyed one of the walls on the large dam project on Vortian Continuous. This flooded a whole chunk of the island. It did make for an epic battle scene though. Sadly, all of that water that I had contained was draining. It took me a second to realize, but I couldn't just use a repair tool on the dam. I had to go into the dam editor and completely rebuild the wall. The dam basically had no water left in it. Quite a lot of time went by, expansions and everything, and that was when I finally hit 5,000 population on Vortia. But the population dipped back under 5,000 almost instantly, as the Romans were attacking and took out some of our citizens. After we repelled their invasion, I did it. We hit over 5,000 citizens in Vortia alone. The Great Dam Project also refilled with water. At this point, I completed almost everything I could possibly do with my empire. There was only one thing left, which was to completely deforest the entire world. It wasn't the smartest idea for the long term of the empire, but I did it. And I had completed 100% of Nova Roma.